All right, hey everyone. I'm here today with Dan Steinhardt, who's the publisher of Risk Hedge and an old friend of mine, going back to I don't know what, like 4 or 5 years now. It seems like a long time ago, Dan, that we were in the Caymans.
Yeah, at least it's 2017, 2018.
Yeah. So I was excited to get you on here just because you're one of the people that I feel like thinks deeply about the business, thinks deeply about the customer, has a really strong background in publishing before you became publisher over here. So you started over at Stansberry, am I right on that?
Way back in 2011, I started at Casey Research, and I was
Casey Research.
part of Casey Research when it was acquired by Stansberry.
Nice. Okay. So what were you doing like way back in 2011? Like, how did you come into the business?
I was a CPA, certified public accountant. I was working for the biggest accounting firm in the world in New York City, and I didn't love it. I was a subscriber to Casey Research, actually, and I remember very clearly it was Valentine's Day, 2011, and I was in the office at like 2 a.m. thinking about how much I hated it, and I emailed the Casey Research guys on a whim, asking if I could work for free. And one thing led to another. I eventually started working there full time.
Wow. So you started as like, it's like that classic like kung fu story apprentice to FinPub. And so then when you guys, so Casey got acquired, and you ended over at Stansberry, which I've said for a while. Like I feel like, especially at this point in the business, like they're probably one of the best run publishers historically, or they grew quite a bit, obviously, and then they expanded into market wise. But the publishing culture there, the editorial culture there, was much stronger than other places. And that's a, let me rephrase that. They didn't necessarily always get pulled away by like whatever copy trend was taking over, because I think a lot of times that balance between the quality of the editorial and the quality of the copy, it's very easy to get overbalanced in favor of copy. And I feel like they did a better job than most on kind of restraining that. Would you say that? I mean,
Yeah,
would that be your perspective?
I agree with all that. I think they really have the starting point right. They when I was there, they always had the starting point right, and I believe they still do, which is you start from the product. Like, start with a great guru with a proven way that can actually make subscribers money or actually help them in some other way in their lives. And then from there, you figure out how to market that. I think where some places go wrong is like, oh, SPACs are hot, so let's figure out a way to market SPACs. It's like, well, do you have a product that can consistently make people money in SPACs? And the answer is no, because nobody makes money in SPACs. So I think that's where you can end up attracting a bunch of subscribers who end up resenting you, and just problems start.
Yeah, no, I definitely think, I mean, I think we've all seen that happen where in a rising market, and then with rising businesses as they expand, like it's very tempting, because we know like adding products, like it's a new product launch is one of the best things you can do to monetize that file. And so there's a hunger to keep adding products, but rather than, I would say, I've seen, rather than saying, hey, let's go out and recruit an amazing new guru, or it's just kind of like, well, we have a guy who's experienced in this, he could write that, and he has no experience doing that thing. And then because it's hot, they launch a product there, and then of course, like the returns suck and the customers get unhappy, and it like increases churn. And I think that's what I've always enjoyed about our conversations, offline, is that kind of focus on what's a good product. And like, would you say, like, how would you view that? Like, you talk about great guru, like what's a great guru?
I mean, somebody who's been around the block, first of all, in terms of they have a proven track record of delivering on the promises that are going to be made on their behalf in the promo. That's the number one thing, because you'll run into a lot of gurus who are really, really successful in like a certain type of market, but as soon as the market changes, their way of doing things stops working, and then you have a big editorial problem on your hands, because like, are you supposed to double down on this thing? Are you supposed to get rid of the pub? Like, that's where you run into problems. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's track record. It's like proven ability to deliver long before you launch a newsletter around them.
Yeah. So then let's fast forward. I'm going to skip over our time together at Real Vision. I'll probably come back to that later as a separate kind of conversation. But like in the pure newsletter kind of publishing business, where did you like kind of connect with your partners and everyone at Risk Hedge, and what's the origin story here? How did you guys kind of come together?
So two of my three partners owned Casey Research and sold it to Stansberry. And so after that, I worked for Casey under Stansberry for a little while, did some other stuff, including Real Vision. And I got back in touch with them around 2018. And we just kind of wanted to do something new, launch a little bit of a different newsletter business. We focus on, our USP is we focus on disruption. So we look for big world-changing, things happening in finance or politics or technology, and dig into those trends.
Right. So then with disruption, so I was looking through your site again, and I noticed you have a disruption newsletter. You have about like 5 products that are out there, services or so, and you have disruption, and I also noticed there's a IPO and private market focus products, right?
Yeah, it's IPO focused. We follow private companies and will only recommend to invest in them once they're public.
Okay. So with the kind of advisories that you have, so you have the front end product is then disruption, right? So then that's a very big theme with like kind of a tight focus in the sense of like you said, like big, like industry changing, world changing kind of stuff. So what is the kind of rationale then for the other products that you have? Like why those products?
So we will only launch a product if we believe it's an area of the market where our guru has like a true edge, a true sustainable edge, like a way to do better than the market over like a full cycle. So we've got Project 5X, which is all about investing in microcaps. And our editor there has an incredible track record. He was with me back at Casey Research, been in the newsletter world forever, and has more than his fair share of big wins. We have Risk Hedge Venture, which is purely focused on crypto. And then we have Disruption Trader, which is our trading product that is, it's like a technical trading product where it's not quite swing trading. It's like maybe weeks to months. We put on trades at a time, but we have a great trader named Justin Spittler, who's got a really great track record too. And he also runs IPO Insider.
Nice. And then I know you guys grew pretty quick. I think I remember you were above 10 million, like pretty fast. And in the last this market environment, which has been difficult, I know you mentioned that you're one of the few net hirers in the space. So you're obviously doing something pretty good here. You're not, you're obviously not in that issue, having the issue of the scale issues that you have when you're, 100 million and you hit a hard market and like you really have to shrink hard. But how are things right now for you, like business wise? I mean, in this kind of 2022 market environment?
Things are good. I mean, it's not a bonanza like it was in 2020, 2021, but I look at it like the stock market. Like you look at a chart of the stock market, it was like 2014 to 2019 kind of straight up and then went crazy and then kind of leveled back out. And it's might not feel like it, but I feel like that's the way things mostly are in the newsletter industry right now. Like if you could erase that crazy bonanza, just kind of a smooth ride. I think it really depends though.
I've never heard anybody describe it as a bit of a smooth ride.
if you could erase the big bump.
Yeah.
I think it really depends on what kind of business you're in within the newsletter industry, how you're feeling right now. I think if the primary way you grow is acquiring as many subscribers as possible and selling them as much stuff as possible, before, not to be uncharitable, but before they realize you might not be able to come through on all the promises you made in your marketing, I think those types of places are hurting. We more try to focus on continuous building a list of subscribers who know us, like us, and trust us, and maintaining the like and trust and growing it over time, hopefully. And I think if you're in that business, things are perfectly fine.
Yeah. So, I mean, that sounds like, that your Stansberry roots are coming out there, and that focus on lifetime value. And I remember something Porter talked about several times in, I think, our Zoom conversation and from the stage at FMS, about he actually is looking to talk to the investor, not somebody who's convinced to be an investor because of the quality of the customer. Like, I think about that. Like, there's huge bucket. Like, you can break up the market in a lot of different ways. I think there's there's this business opportunity side of the market. Like, that's kind of like, oh, I can just make money in the trend because I've heard crypto is hot or cannabis is hot. And then you have like the income people. And then you have who are usually retirees trying to just maximize what they have. They also buy discount stuff, which is, then you have like active traders, which I feel like is a side of the market that in the last business cycle really expanded for a lot of reasons. And then you have like more traditional like investors who do trade, but they are thinking much more about like, I'm an investor and I invest my money and I'm serious about it. So we would think that's about right in the way that you see the market too.
Yeah, I think that sums it up really well. Another thing that they're really, really great at Stansberry is a lot of their copy, some of their best performing copy is like, it's not topical. It is topical, but it's more about like getting the subscriber to buy into the guy behind the letter and like his worldview and his unique way of seeing things, more so than is like crypto's hot, make money in crypto. And when you can do that, you just have an amazing foundation to just grow that relationship over time.
Yeah, I think that's when I think about like other groups that have done well with that. Like, I'd say Aaron DeHogue, and when they had Paul Mampilli, that was a big thing. Like, you're buying into this guy, and that's like, it's almost like it feels like a traditionalist view of newsletter publishing, when it's not, like, because there has been like this, and maybe this is the factor of the market that we've been in. There has been this kind of like, well, let's just catch the fast trend and whatever's hot, kind of attitude, and everybody's attracted to it because there's just times when, like, on the acquisition side in particular, like, okay, the only thing that's selling is crypto. Okay, dive into crypto. So we got to, and so there's like this real kind of pressure. But I think that happens mostly kind of, it's a factor of the market, but you're impacted more by it if you haven't done what you're talking about doing here, which is building out a worldview, interpreting the world, kind of creating this vision of like, this is how this guru sees this thing. This is his track record, and finding the people who are attracted to that is a different kind of customer than somebody who's coming in for gains. Right. Sorry, I can go on, but like, how do you think about that then? Like, how do you spend time on that in your customer journey, in your copy, in your editorial, to sell that worldview? Like, what's your take on like the actual implementation of that idea?
Ideally, it starts from the first asset you use to acquire the subscriber, right? Like, hopefully you can kind of sprinkle some stuff throughout there that doesn't make it sound too much like it's about the guru, still in the benefit of the reader, while still keeping their attention, entertaining them throughout the letter. And then we have really robust onboarding series that when somebody comes aboard, they're not just dropped like into the middle of the jungle on the random thing we happen to be writing about that day. Like, we bring people along, let them know who we are, let them know what we're all about, why we do what we do. I think if you get that right, you only really have one chance to get that right in the beginning. But if you do, you have a great foundation to have a long-term customer who will spend a lot of money.
So is that done in a kind of a welcome series?
Yeah, welcome series. We've started using videos a little bit more. I think
Yeah.
any editor who's decent on video, the more you show their face, the better.
Yeah, I mean, video is probably one of the best tools for just engagement and kind of building relationship building. So, but then now, having been in the business for a while, I also know then that, without asking, so I'm going to ask you, that I'm sure you've had a lot of issues finding copywriters who are able to like understand that worldview, that kind of perspective of the editor, and then writing copy that fits it versus hey, indicators are selling, I'm going to write an indicator package. How can I turn this into an indicator? Right.
Yeah, that you just hit on probably the biggest challenge we have in our business. I chalk it up to largely the fact that our business is remote, and are the copywriters and the editors just like don't get together in person that often. So we make a real point of it a couple times a year. Get everybody together, have a couple meals, have a couple drinks, just talk about stuff, because they need to know each other. They need to have a real relationship with each other. And when you have that, what you described becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I feel like this is an industry-wide problem that we have, because I hear it from almost every publisher that I talk to, like especially offline. And it gets to the point where like Porter, joked about going to, like, was it Copy Chief Live, and starting his talk there as, I fucking hate copywriters. Like taken to a very extreme level. But it's kind of this issue because I literally had this conversation with somebody yesterday who was just so angry because they did have, like, there's an editor with, like, I think his track record is like 1600% on his options services here. And he's a really good editor. He's really, and they couldn't sell it. And literally every copywriter that they have has been doing that thing where, like, I won't write a promo unless I've seen a version of that headline work in somebody else's business. And you're like, well, then you're not really a copywriter. You're just a copier. And so, I mean, it's got to be frustrating as hell. Like, especially bringing new copywriters in to deal with, like, this almost refusal to try and actually understand the product in the editor, because you're selling the editor and he's the product.
You almost need to get up. There's like a sweet spot to get a copywriter, right? Like, you don't want someone who has no clue what they're doing, because then you have to invest years in them. But you don't want to invest someone who's been around too long, because then they might be like you described. So there's a sweet spot right in the middle where they know enough, but they don't know too much that they've acquired all these bad habits you can't break.
Yeah, I think that's, any copywriters listening, like, and if you want to understand pain points of publishers, like, this is a pain point, like selling their actual editors and products rather than just, like, whatever you saw somebody else write. Like, this is, I hear it so much from so many people that, like, it's a pervasive problem.
Yeah.
And but then when you do find a great copywriter to kind of understand it, then, like you said, like, the customers stick around. So, like, I mean, the fact that you're describing 2022 like as kind of a smooth year is a great sign, like, of that kind of model, which I think is interesting to me, that the type of more traditional publishing where you are building the relationship is producing that kind of an effect for you in this last year.
Yeah. And also, it has to do a lot with the congruence between the copy and the editorial too, which it largely comes down to trying to make it congruent. Like, a lot of times you'll see like the resources within a company pour over every single word in copy and, like, make it perfect and entertaining and boring and all that stuff, and then, like, let the guru write whatever the hell he wants in editorial, and he might not be that great of a writer. It's like the prospect is like, is this the same guy I brought a product from? So it helps to have a staff of, like, managing editors who really know what they're doing, who apply the same very, very high standards that you apply to copy to your editorial.
Nice. That's so what does that look like then on the ground for somebody who maybe hasn't had that kind of an experience, and especially for some of the smaller players who've had to kind of do everything themselves? What do you mean when you say, like, this congruence and putting that kind of effort in? What are the kind of the main brushstrokes of what that should look like?
You basically, you want to apply the basics of what you'd call, like, good copywriting, like good copywriting principles. So prove everything you say is one of our non-negotiable editorial rules, as it is in all good copy. But I think that should be applied to editorial as well. Be entertaining. A lot of gurus will just kind of drone on and on about stuff that they think is important, but the reader doesn't necessarily find important. So you often need a good managing editor to kind of keep your guru on track and focus on what the reader cares about.
Yeah. I always remember the early days of Palm Beach Letter when Mark Ford was the only editor. I mean, I think Tom Dyson. I remember I'd get copy from Mark, and I started reading it thinking that it was a newsletter, like it was just an issue of the newsletter.
Yeah,
And
that's the
then
holy grail, right?
right, exactly. And it was always so like, and it was always like, oh, that's so good. Cause it'd be like, oh, wow, this is one of the most interesting newsletters I've got from them issues lately. And I'm reading it. And then like not even 3/4 of the way, I get in and I'm like, oh, this is the upsell, like amazing. And you're right. That does seem to be the holy grail, that like there is no separation. Like the wall doesn't stop from the copy to the promo. Are you, all of your editors then kind of veterans of the space, so you haven't really had to train the editors as much, or is it just the managing editors are just, it's kind of their job to really work with the guru?
We have a little bit of a mix. Me and my executive editor have been in the business for more than 10 years, so we do the best we can to mentor and just to train people on what we've learned over the years.
Yeah, I was always shocked when you and I both spent time as head of publishing at Real Vision. You're probably more qualified for it than I. And I was always shocked when you talked to some of the guys who wrote for the institutional newsletters, because they were like literally like weren't they like they'd be intentionally trained to make the language hard to understand, right?
Yeah, and they're good at it.
And it's crazy because it was just like the whole goal was to make people feel like there was something there that they understood that was important, but they couldn't really make it out themselves, so they would need to pay to hire them to help them figure out what to do.
Yeah. I wrote one of their free newsletters for a short time, and I always took pride in like explaining things in a way that the average person who doesn't know much about investing could understand. And I remember really clearly working with a couple of the women who were there, and they read my newsletter and they wanted to ask me a question afterwards. And they're like, Dan, why are you talking about animals in your letter? Like, what's a bear? And I was like, oh, so this is like, they're very smart people. It's just, if you don't do it for a living, you don't do it for a living.
Right. And that's where, like, so you guys have a very good investor audience. You have a very robust kind of business right now. You do have trading services, but where do you think that market is right now? Like just from spitballing here, like I feel like the investing customer has gotten more sophisticated over the last 10 years. Traders, we had this huge boom in trading from, I'd say, 2008. I mean, I always say this, like from every crash, you have a different trading boom. So like you go back to like the early 90s kind of recession, then you have the day trading boom as a tech bubble kind of took off, and then you have a crash. And then after the .com crash was the Forex boom, right? And then after 2008 was when like all the really good option service publishers kind of took off. Like options trading took off like crazy, and then crypto trading, because it was such a long bull market, and then you have a crash. But I feel like that brought a lot of, and we see this with young people, we have a lot of traders coming into the audience. And so I have this feeling, and this is all it is, but it's like a feeling that while we have a sophistication of investors going on, that we also have a sophistication of traders and an aging of some of those traders that came in, to where they're starting to get more interested in investing again. And then you combine that with a really, really crazy geopolitical environment. And I feel like we're going back like to a renaissance in like investing in macro, and kind of much more focus on like the investing side of the business, where honestly, a lot of the growth has been in the trading side of the business over the last, 7-8 years. I mean, do you see that way?
The trading part of our business is the smallest part. I don't know if I have the best insight for you on that. I would probably, trading is hard to sell because you can't tell stories. It's not hard to sell. It's hard to maintain an audience of traders because you can't tell stories. And there are just dozens or hundreds of like individual traders who have their own little microsites or on Twitter who charge $99 a month. Like there's just ferocious competition for traders who like strictly read charts and give you trades based on charts. I think the place where you can get a competitive advantage is in like your personality and your authenticity, just very similar to investing. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with JC at All Star Charts, but he's
Oh
like,
yeah, love JC.
he's a force of nature. Even if he could talk about anything on video, and I would listen to him because he's entertaining and he's got a worldview and he always sticks to it and he makes fun of the news and it's great. I think
Yeah.
that's kind of what you need if you're gonna scale as a trader.
Yeah, and I think of that, like, 'cause I think of like who've had some of the best trading businesses, and I think of John Carter at Simpler Trading, and like he's like this. I mean, John Carter's a unicorn in the sense of like he's this amazing trader, real money track record. He can trade live and make money on a webinar, but he's also like this amazing pitch man. And so it's almost like I always thought of John as like he's too good in the sense that you could build a whole business model around him, but it's almost impossible to ever find a second one. And so that model that is perfect for him is going to be really hard to replicate with anybody else, because you can't expect somebody to be like this amazing pitch man while they're live trading and making money in the markets like on a regular basis. And so, and people love him. But yeah, like the trading, that's an interesting point about all of the competition, because there is a huge amount of competition there. And I think that point about stories is important, like too, because it is like you're talking about the markets. And so if you don't find ways to create interest and story and engagement, it's harder, especially with the FTC things over the last 2 years. It's hard to talk about things like income, and which is, I feel like how a lot of trading was sold for so long is basically as an income product.
Right. Yeah. It's trading analysis is a commodity, and you need to find a way to make it not a commodity, basically. And through investing, you can do that by telling unique stories, and the uniqueness is in the unique stories you find. It's a lot harder with trading. It often comes down to someone having to have like a very magnetic personality.
Yeah. And so that's an interesting, I mean, there's a lot to dig out from there. Let's step out now. So you've been around a lot of people in the business and a lot of great investors and a lot of great publishers, and who would you say are some of the people that you've admired in the business?
Well, the guy who got me into the business is one of the greatest newsletter writers ever. It was Doug Casey. I remember the first time I ever stumbled across something he wrote. I was like, man, how is this the first time I'm ever hearing this kind of stuff? This guy is like, it was like almost like he was putting into words what was already in my head. So that was and that's a very good example of what we talked about before, where like, as opposed to selling greed or like a single stock pick that can go up 1,000%, like the way the early Casey Research sold their subscriptions was like tribal almost. Like you read Doug and you feel like, this guy gets me. Like, I want to be a member of his tribe. I bought products from them just because I want to be like Doug.
Yeah. That's kind of the ideal guru.
Yeah. And then I worked who's the CEO of Investor Place now. I worked for Brian Hunt for 2 years when Casey Research was acquired by Stansberry, and he's a genius. He's great.
What makes him a genius? I agree with you. I'm just, how would you characterize it?
That's a good question. There's a lot of one-trick ponies in newsletters, like guys who are great at copy but don't really understand investing, guys who are great at investing but could not sell a newsletter. He seems to be like an A+ at copy and editorial and training people and managing a business and making employees feel good. I just think it's a very rare package.
Yeah, that is. I know, because I mean, when I think of Brian Hunt, I think of like a lot of the articles he wrote about the newsletter business for Stansberry. I thought of like things about like I remember we had a meeting with him. He was part of a meeting that I was in. We were talking about a bunch of ideas, and he talked about like the acquisition, like what kind of trends are good for acquisition versus not. And he was saying, you need something that's going to be 3 to 5 years because it takes so long to find a good idea, that when you get a promo that works, you want to be able to run it for more than 6 months. And it's like simple things like that that are like, when you say it, you're like, oh, well, that's like the most obvious thing in the world, except it's not the most obvious thing in the world because almost nobody does it. And so, yeah, he's full of just stuff. I think he helped launch Katusa too, and writing copy.
He did. Yeah. His sales letter is still their control. Like we're 6-7 years later now.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. That's a couple of good ones then. So then,
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What do you think about the migration to Substack of some of the greatest newsletter writers?
Oh, I think it's fascinating, right? Because like Substack to me is, I'm very curious because there's part of me that's like, this is a terrible business model for Substack, but it's an amazing model for everybody else, because it's creating this universe of readers, right? And so that's kind of like their thing. But once you get to a certain size, right, there's nothing that keeps you there, right? So your most successful newsletters are not like are going to be motivated eventually to not be there, because their model is to take a percentage of sales. So now you stacked another 2.7 or whatever percent on top of your merchant fee. I can export my lists. I can actually keep publishing there and just put other links in to other sales pages, right? And so I think it's a great model. I started a Substack the other day just because I wanted to start to put some stuff out there, and it's such an easy thing, right? And so it's really great I feel for our industry from a recruiting standpoint. I think it's a great place to publish in order to find new readers, because you will get new audience. I do think that a lot of the larger publishers on there, some of the better ones, like they benefited from this like early growth curve of Substack. So it's kind of like a rising tide. And I think they think that they're really good at publishing, and they're good at parts of it, but they don't really have the full business yet. And so I think that as that audience of publishers gets more sophisticated, that it's going to put a lot of downward pressure on Substack as a business model. But I do think that because it's so easy, you see like this huge influx of people who would not have done a newsletter doing newsletters.
Right.
And so I think that there's a lot of possible, like, I think it's a great place to find new editors. I think it's a great place to find content. I think it's a great place to find possible new JVs. I think it's a great place for a lot of things, but I'm skeptical on like the long-term like viability of that business versus, because I look at them as an ecosystem business, right? They have a wonderful ecosystem platform, and so they're enabling all these writers. But I think of market-wise, and I think of the Agora companies, and those are ecosystem, like a similar thing, right? They each have like a centralized, like Agora built a centralized team to be able to fund and roll out and support all these editorial franchises, but they're building full businesses. Market-wise took a similar approach. Substack has like a very limited platform, which is really awesome when you start, and really starts to bump into things as you get bigger, like that you're not going to be, doing as well, especially once you switch over to paid media, right? Like that's where things start to really get difficult, I think. And so I don't know. I think like that's my kind of like view on it right now. I'm optimistic about the fact that I feel like it's growing the actual industry itself. I would probably be a little more pessimistic as an investor in Substack.
So you're not buying it when it IPOs?
I don't know. I mean, look, I could be flat out wrong. But yeah, I'd have to dig into like, well, what, because I think that issue of like, so your biggest group, like they could have 600,000 people, but why do they need, once they get to 600,000 people, they have a ton of revenue, they can export the list, they can link to other sales pages. Why are they going to continue to pay you 2.7% when they don't have to? Like, so that's my biggest kind of like issue there, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think it's the perfect place for smaller, like independent writers who want their authenticity to like attract a readership.
Hmm.
But when it comes to the marketing, you're probably, as you get bigger, you're probably better off their platform.
Yeah, but I think it's a great, like like I said, I use it. Um, and so I could be wrong, or they could pivot in ways that really make it sustainable. Um, but I think of it as, it's almost like, I don't know, I think of it as more of like it's a short or medium term trendy business that has potential, I think, to turn into other things. But I just question that piece. But I think they've done such a wonderful job of bringing new writers into the space. People like, I know people who are like, they're, because there's like this huge finance community on Twitter. Um, and a lot of those guys on Twitter, like they're professional researchers or traders or whatever. And then like, they've never had a publishing business, but with Substack, they're like, I'm gonna write everything there and build off of my Twitter following, which is now X thousand people, and it turns out to work. And then they start to charge people, and then they have a business, and it's encouraging like a higher quality of folks to come in and try and learn publishing. So um, I think that part of it has been great. Um, and I guess like right now, then where do you see like what's your kind of take on like, I guess you kind of gave that earlier, take on the industry and where we're going, like that idea of like for you guys building relationship is kind of like the stabilizing factor in your business.
Yeah, I sometimes think about it. Eugene Schwartz's like 5 stages of market awareness.
Yeah.
I think for a long time, the newsletter industry has existed in like the first stage or the second stage where people don't know much about it. Sometimes a lot of people don't even know it exists. People might realize they have a problem in the sense like they don't have enough money, but they don't know buying a newsletter might be the solution to their problem. So I think I think a lot of the things that have worked in the newsletter industry in terms of marketing have been like targeted to people who are being exposed to it for the first time. And I'm sure there's still millions of people with money who would buy a newsletter that have not yet. But I think there's a lot more people who have bought a newsletter and are kind of like get it. And so I feel like as we move to those later stages of awareness, different things become important. Like I think the reason I asked about Substack is I believe like authenticity and genuineness is just so important, and it's only going to get more important as the critical mass of people who have tried 1, 2, 3, 4 newsletters and been disappointed by it just continues to grow.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you're right. I think that's the general trend. The general media trend has been towards like, because I mean, you go back to like direct mail, and like there was such a chasm between the customer and the editor. Right? It was just the only thing they knew was what was written, what you sent them. That's it. And there was not a lot of other people. Like even when the mail was full, there's really a handful of companies that were sending mail. And now we have like, I'm used to like, I feel like I can intimately understand like a politician if I follow him well enough, because there's so much video, so much conversation. So like you can get to know somebody and who they are if you pay attention, if you want to. And so you can't keep that wall for long. That's the thing. And as the generations, shift over, and the people who are like younger and not even younger now, because it's happening with boomers, but like I just think every year that goes by, like people are going to want to be on the inside more than on the outside, and you do that with lots more content. And you can't build a business of multiple editors where all of them are fake all the time on camera, like, and people are going to call you out. And so I think like a lot of the things that we talked about being like trends. Like authenticity was a trend 10 years ago, but you know, that's because people saw it coming, and everyone always expects things to come faster, I feel like, than they do.
Yeah.
Or, and so I don't think it's totally hit the newsletter world yet, because the traditional newsletter world, because the audience, there's still so much of that audience that is kind of like, you know, boomers and older even still, who aren't looking for that. But I think that the growth opportunity is going to be much more towards video and social, and that's going to tip, I mean, that's going to tip the balance of negotiating power towards the hands of the editors who are better at it.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, for better or worse, young people are highly, highly skeptical of marketing. Like a lot of times the first hint they see that a YouTube video, like a product endorsement is coming in a YouTube video, and they're out and they're like disparaging the person in the YouTube video. So we're going to have to find new ways to sell to these young people.
Yeah, but I think it goes back to what you said about Doug Casey, though, right? Like, you wanted to be a part of his tribe, so it's like, you know, a YouTuber like just doing a product placement that has nothing to do with like who that guy really is feels inauthentic, versus like, you know, if Doug Casey is saying like he's all in on these things and you've bought into his worldview, and he's like, here's this thing that I do that, you know, is a perfect expression of that worldview and who we are.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's just the format changes. It's, you know, from great writers to like great content creators. You know, I almost think like I think Tim Sykes is amazing. I think Tim he's brilliant, and I think he was almost too early, right? Like, he built a great, and they have a fantastic business, so that's not anything there. But I feel like Tim is less focused on being like dominating social the way that he was when it was rising. And I feel like there's a audience opportunity here now in our market that whoever really starts to nail that side of it is going to have more growth opportunity than almost anyone else, at least for the next, I don't know, 6 to 10 years. Maybe not that long. I'm terrible at timing, but for a period of time.
I think too, I bet most people will disagree with me on this, but I think topical funnels, like we talked about this before, like finding the thing that's hot, finding the thing that's in the tide of mass desire, and then marketing that and figuring out the product last. I think that if it's not a thing of the past, it's very dangerous. It's tough to run a sustainable business that way, especially with the regulations. And forget about the whole product. Like, if you find something that's very hot, that means it's at a level of awareness with the ordinary investor. That means it's very likely that it's not going to be hot very soon. Like it might crash soon. Like that's when things are easiest to market, when they're closest to crashing. So there's just so much, like, I know you can make a lot of money quickly if you get that right, but there's so much danger there, in my opinion.
That's a very, very good point, because you're right. Like just the regulatory side of it, because if it's that easy, that's when you have all the scammers come in, and that's how you get painted with a broad brush. It's like the Altucher promo from that Bitcoin boost, they weren't doing anything fraudulent, right? They still got, or they like everyone kicked off of Facebook and Google, but they were just in a wave that had lots of scammers, because it was so easy to sell there. And so like that regulatory piece, like nobody wants to look and like say this company is okay, you're good, you're not. They're like, oh, this is terrible, you're all bad.
With the higher level of awareness too comes the higher level of awareness from regulators. Like, I mean, I don't need to tell you, there used to be a way of doing copy where, as long as every individual sentence was true and legally defensible, you're good to go. Even you think you're good to go, even if it all taken together was wildly misleading.
Yeah.
And that's over.
Yeah, for sure. And but that other point, I think, is just as powerful that you have of, like, if you're selling into the peak of the bubble, like, there's nowhere to go but down. that doesn't bring for happy, that doesn't get lots of happy customers.
Definitely.
But that's a core philosophy about how you build a business. Like, is it short-term churn or long-term lifetime value? And how do you find the right mix of dealing with like your acquisition needs, and your like the type of business you have and your cash flow. And like I understand when people kind of get pressured business wise to kind of go towards a hot trend. And there's ways to do it that are effective, and there are ways to do it that are damaging.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, a way to sort of like a band-aid on that, because if you're going to be marketing a lot of stuff, sometimes you're going to be wrong, and you're going to sell something to a bunch of people, and they're going to lose some money, and they're not going to be happy with you. A way to counteract a lot of that is with just like great CRM, great like hold events for your subscribers. Like, just by way of example, we're holding an event next week for our crypto subscribers only, where we invited a lawyer and another guy, and they're going to go through how to invest in crypto in an IRA. If you know anything about that, it's a huge pain in the ass, and it's not something that you can Google. It's like a very quickly evolving thing, and it's effort, and we have to film it and like do all this stuff that's not directly going to show up on our P&L this month or next month, and the month after. But it's the right thing to do, and when you do that for your subscribers, they know it, and they're more likely to stick around. It builds a better bond with them. So when the markets do turn around, they're more likely to, trust you and buy something else from you.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's that authenticity, it's building relationship, but building it like from not just and you could look at it from a total cold-hearted marketing standpoint and say like, this is actually how you retain customers and get them to buy other things. So like the math works, but it's also just like, what kind of business are you building? What kind of audience are you building? Understanding that you are building an audience, which by definition in a digital age and the way that the internet's evolved is kind of, you're building community. And you may not want to have like super open community where everyone's commenting on like everything, because that can become a disaster just both logistically, and you always get those trolls. But it does have that feeling of like, hey, we're looking out for the people, we're taking care of people. Are you that trusted advisor? It's kind of it's classic publishing, but I feel like, again, it's stuff that gets lost when it's so much easier to write it's so much easier because of the bull market. So the tides, if the tide's going out, we'll see who's swimming naked. And I think that's where it's easy to get hurt, is realizing that a lot of the fast money kind of stuff isn't building long-term value for the business.
Yeah. It's about helping your subscribers at the end of the day, like whether that's giving them profitable stock picks or something soft, or like guiding them through rough markets, or just giving them good guidance in general on stuff like retirement accounts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So, I mean, I guess one last question, and then we can wrap this up. So I take it, like, are you long-term bullish or on publishing, on financial publishing, investment newsletters? Do you think like this industry is growing? Do you think it's going to kind of stay the same? I mean, you're talking about the increased stages of awareness that suggests, I think, that you think it's growing.
I don't know if it'll grow, like if you just take the whole blob of the newsletter industry, if that will grow. But I think publishers who run their businesses right have plenty of room to grow. Mm-hmm. By right, it's all the things we've been talking about in this conversation, like featuring authenticity, doing right by your subscribers, and once you have the products that help people, figuring out how to market them, not the other way around, not figuring out how to market and then some lame product on the back of it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's kind of the shift here. It's almost like there was this period of time when everybody I talked to wanted to be $100 or $200 or $300 million publisher, and then the people that I know who kind of did that all regretted it. Like, the business has stopped being fun. You hit a certain point in your day is primarily dealing with whatever lawsuit is coming up, not just regulators, but just employee, like all kinds of stuff. And when when you have like pullbacks or things get hard in the market, you have huge layoffs. And so I almost feel like there's been a mental shift in the industry where a lot of the entrepreneurs and publishers that I know have kind of rethought and like, life is really good if you can get to be like a $40 to $60 million publisher and stay there.
Yeah. Well, Richard Russell has that famous essay about why, he writes about like the perfect business, and there's lots of things about the newsletter business that make it great, like the recurring revenue, the bond you build with subscribers, the independence, and like all that stuff goes away if your main thing is acquire and churn and burn. Like that stuff only applies if you got an audience of people who like you and trust you and continue to like you and trust you.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. If anyone wants to reach out, I'm happy to connect you guys to Dan. If you need anything, Dan, let me know. Like, you're, like I said, you're I think one of the best newer, I'd say newer, you're not new, but newer publishers in the industry in the last, or groups in the industry in the last like 5 years, that like not everyone knows you're out there. So I'm glad that you had the time to come and kind of talk to me today. Always good to catch up.
Yeah, you too. Thanks a lot for having me. Let's talk again soon.
All right. Take care. Bye.
See you later.